I heard the splash before I even reached the backyard. At first, I thought maybe an animal had fallen in, or maybe one of the neighborhood kids had jumped the fence again. But when I stepped outside and saw a grown woman, someone I had never invited, someone I had barely spoken to, floating on her back in my private pool, humming like she owned the place, I knew I was dealing with something far worse. I was dealing with an HOA Karen. My name is Daniel, and I work crazy hours. My backyard is my refuge, my quiet escape from the constant rules, meetings, and nitpicking of our HOA. So imagine my shock when I found Heather, our self-appointed, self-important HOA president, relaxing in my water like she'd booked a spa appointment. She didn't even flinch when she saw me. "Oh hey," she said, waving lazily. "You weren't using it, so I figured it's fine." "Fine? Fine? This is private property," I snapped, trying to keep my voice calm. She rolled her eyes. "Pools are a community visual feature. That means the community gets to enjoy them. It's technically part of the HOA aesthetic. I'm just making sure it's being used responsibly." I stared at her, stunned. Not only had she broken into my yard, she was justifying it with HOA nonsense. When she finally got out of the pool, dripping water all over my patio, she strutted past me like I had inconvenienced her. That night, I checked my security cameras. She had literally walked up, unlocked my side gate with something, and marched in with a towel over her shoulder. She'd done it confidently, like it wasn't the first time. The next morning, I confronted her at the HOA office. She didn't deny it. She doubled down. "You don't use your pool enough," she said. "Idle amenities hurt neighborhood value. I'm simply ensuring compliance." I couldn't believe it, and when I demanded she stop entering my property, she smirked. "It's not trespassing if it benefits the community." That was the moment I realized something. Logic, threats, complaints. None of it will work on a Karen who believes she's above the law. I needed a plan, a real one, something that would make her stop forever. And trust me, what I did next? She never saw it coming, and neither will you. After Heather's brazen pool stunt, I knew talking wasn't going to work. Threats and polite warnings? Useless. HOA. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was strategically entitled. Every word I said only seemed to fuel her confidence. That's when I realized, if I wanted her out of my pool for good, I'd need a plan that worked smarter, not harder. Step 1 was reconnaissance. I started keeping detailed notes of her schedule, when she left her house, when she returned, and her usual HOA inspection routes. I even installed a couple more discreet cameras around my property. Nothing extreme, just enough to catch her in the act and know her patterns. Step 2 was psychological. Karen thrived on attention, so I needed to create the illusion that she wasn't getting away with her behavior. The plan had to make her feel watched without escalating to police-level confrontation. At least not yet. I didn't want to risk legal complications. I wanted to outsmart her, to make the pool her obstacle, not mine. Step 3 was creativity. I began thinking about what made her tick. Heather was obsessed with HOA rules, cleanliness, and community welfare. That obsession was my entry point. If I could frame the situation as a violation of her own rigid standards, I could manipulate her sense of authority against her. The idea was simple. Give her a taste of her own medicine in a way she could never ignore. I sketched several drafts of my plan, each more intricate than the last. One involved harmless, but undeniable barriers that forced her to stop and think. Another revolved around an unexpected public exposure that highlighted her overreach. And a third involved turning her own HOA obsession into a trap, making her complicit in her own defeat. By the end of the week, I had a full blueprint. The plan didn't rely on confrontation or legal threats. It relied on strategic pressure. It relied on turning her arrogance into her vulnerability. And most importantly, it relied on timing. One wrong move, one hesitation, and she'd sense the trap. But if executed correctly, I could guarantee she would never set foot in my pool again. The key ingredient? Patience. I couldn't rush. I had to wait for the perfect moment when she least expected it. It would require observation, subtlety, and a bit of psychological finesse. But I was ready. I was confident. I could almost see it play out. Heather approaching the pool, smug as ever. And then stopping dead in her tracks, caught in the trap I had carefully laid. That night, I double-checked every detail. My cameras were set. The barriers were ready. The timing aligned with her usual morning strolls. And I smiled, knowing that soon, Heather would learn what it meant to cross the wrong homeowner. The moment was coming. And when it did, it would be spectacular. The sun was barely rising when the moment finally came. I was sipping my coffee, watching the security feed on my phone, when I saw her. Heather, HOA badge clipped to her polo, clipboard in hand, marching down the sidewalk with that stiff, authoritative stride she believed intimidated people. She wasn't inspecting anything. No, she was heading straight for my side gate. Exactly as predicted. She paused at the gate, looked around once, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the same little metal tool she'd used before. Some kind of lockpick, or maybe a master key she'd convinced herself was official HOA property. She slid it into the lock with practiced ease. Click. Just like that, she let herself into my yard again. My heart thumped. Not with fear, but anticipation. This was the moment I'd been planning for all week. And she was walking right into it. She rounded the corner toward the pool, but this time, she didn't find the serene backyard she was used to invading. She stopped abruptly, her jaw tightening, eyes narrowing at the scene I had set just hours earlier. First, there was the large, professionally printed sign mounted on the fence. Pool closed, HOA safety violation under investigation. I had designed it using the exact fonts and formatting the HOA used for community notices. It looked so official that even I did a double take when I hung it. Next, she saw the bright orange hazard tape I had draped neatly across the shallow end, leading toward a floating clipboard in the water. The clipboard held a laminated inspection form, listing a series of exaggerated, non-existent safety violations: cracked tiles, contaminated water, unstable ladders, the works. But the real trap wasn't the props. It was the camera, the one she didn't know I had installed directly above the pool. A brand new spotlight camera equipped with a motion-activated speaker. And the moment she stepped closer to inspect the sign, the device triggered. A loud beep sounded, followed by a firm, automated voice. Warning, unauthorized entry detected. This area is under active investigation. Trespassing will be reported. Heather froze like a deer in headlights. She spun around, scanning the yard, gripping her clipboard so tightly I thought it might snap. She backed away from the pool slowly at first, then faster, her bravado dissolving with every step. And for the first time since I'd moved into this HOA nightmare, I watched something I never thought I'd see. Heather, self-crowned queen of the neighborhood, retreating. She practically stumbled out of my yard, slamming the gate behind her. My plan had worked, but this was only the first phase. What came next would change everything. After Heather's dramatic retreat from my pool, I knew the victory was only temporary. Karen didn't give up easily. Her ego was massive, her sense of entitlement almost comical, but dangerous. If I wanted to make this a permanent solution, I had to turn her own tactics against her. And trust me, that's exactly what I did. The next morning, I started with subtle reminders. I sent an anonymous tip to the HOA office, detailing a potential safety hazard at my property. I didn't mention Heather by name, of course, but the wording was carefully crafted so anyone reading it would immediately think of overzealous neighborhood watchdogs who interfere with private property. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even technically deceit, it was clever positioning. And as expected, word traveled fast. By the end of the day, several board members had quietly spoken to Heather about respecting property boundaries and following protocol for inspections. Meanwhile, I kept reinforcing the physical deterrence in my yard. The hazard tape remained, the official-looking sign stayed, and the motion-detecting speaker was upgraded with random voice, recordings of security alerts. Every time Heather approached, even from across the street, she hesitated, glanced nervously at the cameras, and sometimes even turned away without entering. I began capturing the moments on my own hidden cameras, building a file of undeniable proof of her intimidation tactics. But I didn't stop there. I knew the real trick was to appeal to her obsession with community rules. So I accidentally left some HOA rulebooks on my patio, strategically opened to sections about private property rights. When she peeked over the fence out of habit, she'd see them. The subtle psychological nudge worked like a charm. She began second-guessing herself, questioning if she was truly following HOA protocol, or just acting on ego. It didn't take long for the shift to happen. The once brazen, unapologetic Karen who had waltzed into my backyard without hesitation started avoiding the property altogether. Even when she passed by in the street, she maintained her distance, glancing nervously at the signage and surveillance cameras. The power had shifted. She had become cautious, hesitant, aware that any move she made could be documented and, importantly, used against her by the HOA itself. By the end of that week, the backyard was finally mine again. I could swim in peace, host friends, and enjoy my private oasis without interruption. But I knew that a true victory wouldn't just be about fences, cameras, or signs. It would be about making Heather respect boundaries without creating a battle. And now came the final step, the part that would ensure she never dared to return, turning this entire ordeal into a story I could proudly tell. The final step in my plan wasn't about confrontation, intimidation, or cameras. It was about psychological closure. Heather had learned to keep her distance, but I wanted something more, a lesson that would stick forever, one that combined creativity, HOA regulations, and just a touch of poetic justice. It started with a community meeting. I knew Heather would attend. She never missed an opportunity to assert authority. But this time I had prepared. I created a short presentation, polished, professional, and completely factual, highlighting HOA rules regarding private property, pool access, and trespassing. I even included screenshots from my security cameras, showing the repeated violations of a certain overzealous HOA president. Every image, every timestamp, every note was undeniable. As Heather took the floor to speak, I let her go first. She tried her usual bravado, claiming she was ensuring the neighborhood's well-being, but my presentation was ready. I countered each claim with calm, factual points, occasionally projecting the security footage so everyone could see her actions. I could feel the room shift. Whispers rippled through the audience as neighbors exchanged looks. The woman who had once strutted into my yard as if she owned it was now squirming under the weight of her own arrogance exposed. Then came the coup de grace. I casually mentioned a clause in the HOA bylaws that stated any member who trespasses on private property repeatedly could face fines or suspension from the board. Eyes widened. Heather's confident smile faltered. She tried to protest, but the room had already turned. Even other board members, previously afraid to challenge her, now nodded in agreement. The power dynamic had completely shifted. After the meeting, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Heather left quietly, clutching her clipboard, defeated. She never returned to my pool, never again strutted into my backyard, and never dared reference the community aesthetic as an excuse. The subtle, strategic combination of cameras, barriers, psychological nudges, and leveraging HOA rules against her had worked perfectly. That night, I finally took a long, uninterrupted swim. The water sparkled under the moonlight, completely mine. I floated on my back, grinning, thinking about the journey from chaos to control. The lesson was clear. You don't need to escalate, yell, or fight a Karen head-on. You need strategy, patience, and a bit of creativity. Some people call it revenge. I call it justice, calculated, fair, and permanent. And as I stepped out of the pool, I knew one thing for certain. Heather would never, ever forget whose pool this really was.